Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talk to the Hall. And today I have the honor to have Jeff Duncan with me. How are you, Jeff?
Dan, I'm doing great. It's great to hear your voice across the pond and from my favorite country in the world, France. Very honored
Yeah,
to be on with you.
because I'm based in France, Paris, and we're trying to do connection with you guys in US to understand better the sport and American football, the NFL, anything, the Hall of Fame. But we want to do it in a right way. We want to educate people in Europe and especially France the right way. It could be good that one country start to think in the right way, and to evaluate the sport, what it takes to be a professional athlete, and how you can evaluate the excellence of these games through the history. So, Jeff, are you ready to talk about that with some weird English accent?
I'm excited. Let's do it.
Okay, so my first question, it's the most easy one because I have to start from the beginning. How do you start following football? Did something start from your young age or it start after?
Well, yeah, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and like a lot of people, probably yourself or others watching the program, I followed in the footsteps of my older brother. My older brother played football. He was a really good football player in high school and college level. And so I kind of got into the sport through my brother. But to be honest with you, Dan, where I grew up, basketball was kind of the dominant sport. It wasn't until I moved to the state of Louisiana to start my journalism career that football really took over. And in the state of Louisiana is just a long history of being kind of football crazy state. The South of the United States in general is a very dominant football crazy area. Alabama, Mississippi,
Yeah.
Louisiana, Texas. So when I got down here to start covering sports as a professional, football became the dominant sport, and I've been kind of following it at a high level ever since.
So you you starting as a journalist, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
This is
just
this is this is where you start really going focus through, not as a fan, but as really uh, looking through the details, understand better the aspect of the game.
very much so. I mean, in Louisiana and in New Orleans in particular, football is they jokingly refer to it as the fourth season. You know, we have Mardi Gras season, we have crawfish season, and we have it's actually the third one. We have football season. I mean, football is just incredibly popular. It's been that way for decades here since like the 1950s and 60s. The Sugar Bowl football game, the college annual game on New Year's Day is always been one of the biggest college football games in America. It goes back a century. And once we got an NFL team in this market in 1966, first season, 1967, it's been a Saints town ever since. And so for me, starting out in journalism, covering football, and then getting to cover the New Orleans Saints, which are so popular here. I mean, Dan, everything we do, anything we write on the New Orleans Saints gets read by tens of thousands of people. It's just an incredibly popular team, and I didn't know that when I started in my journalism career. I knew about the Green Bay Packers and the Pittsburgh Steelers and the
Steelers.
Kansas City Chiefs. Some of these maybe better known, high profile clubs, but when I got to New Orleans, I learned pretty quickly that the Saints, while they weren't as successful on the field, were every bit as popular.
And talking about your young career as a journalist first, um, how do you try to look at the game? What was the specific that you really took interest to develop and share with the people?
Well, there's a lot of different things. I mean, as a journalist, we have to be objective. We're not really fans of the team. I think that's hard for some people to understand.
Yeah,
The New Orleans Saints, while I don't root against them in any way, I'm not really. It doesn't put it this way. It doesn't bother me when they lose. I don't get caught up in the games, but I do root for the story. So
yeah,
that's a little different, right? I want a good story. So when the New Orleans Saints win, a lot of the times it's a better story. So sometimes you're rooting for that. I have to say, when the Saints were in the Super Bowl back in 2009, I was definitely rooting for the Saints to win because it was a much better story for the city of New Orleans if they were to win the championship. So while I'm not really having allegiance to the team, I definitely, it's easier and more enjoyable to write about a team that's winning than losing. This past season, the Saints were 5-12. They had really a down season, and it wasn't a whole lot of fun covering the team. So selfishly, sometimes you do want them to be successful because it just makes your job a little easier. But I would say one of the important things I try to do, Dan, is I try to show beyond just the sport itself. Sometimes I like to show the personalities of the players. I'm really kind of fascinated by leadership. So I like to show great leaders and what makes great leaders. I thought Drew Brees and Sean Payton, when they were here, were the best leaders I've ever covered. How you lead men and how you lead a team, and some of the traits and characteristics that are involved in that, leading a group of men into battle, I think is fascinating to me. And the Saints have great leaders right now with Demario Davis, Cameron Jordan, Tyrann Mathieu, some of the great players they have. So I'm always fascinated to show that aspect of it because I think
Yeah,
those traits and principles of leadership apply to any walk of life. So if you're not necessarily a huge American football fan, you might read a story about Drew Brees and how he leads his team, and you might learn something as maybe a business leader or a chief executive officer of a company that might apply to your work or even in your home life.
yeah,
So I try to make it as broad as I can to reach as big an audience as possible.
yeah. And what you're saying now, it's music to my ear because yeah, I'm took that show in the same aspect. For example, was one of my baseline is beyond stats, embrace the journey. And this is what I'm really focused on. And when I talk with a player, I talk just with a few. I would not say I'm a guy who talk with a lot of players. Every time I share their story, the idea is to share their journey, to make understand to any person, a kid, a teenage, a young, a more mature person, to understand that everything they are doing, it's not just you just not take that example as sport. You can take it in your life, in your professional life, to take it to the next level, to work hard day in day out, improve. It's the same thing. So this is where we can come hold together a better society. So this is what I always want to take it through the sport, took the example for people because we all can make sacrifice. You every time a player took that word, I make so many sacrifice during my career. So we can say the same thing during our life. I go late to my home every day to go to work. That's a sacrifice at the end. You sacrifice your family life to your work. So it's the same thing. So I'm just humbled by saying that. I'm not saying I am the best example to in the world, but it's just the way I want to share it. So when you was saying me that when you share your story, it really took me in the right way because I'm really trying to do that. And this is important to understand that the players, and it's what you're saying. Okay, they can have a good game, they can have a bad game, they can have a great performance. They can have doing great stuff, but you don't have metrics to share to understand if they are playing good or bad. But at the end, what is important are the traits, because this is something that you can really evaluate in easy way. Because sometimes to evaluate a performance, you have to be more an expert, have expertise. So it's kind to be complicated, and through your all the how many it's since how many years you're a journalist in New Orleans?
25 now, so a quarter of a
Ye-
century. And,
Yesterday.
and let me just say, yeah, let me just say one thing about what you just said. I've found in my work that when you talk to players years after they've stopped playing or coaches, what you find, Dan, is exactly what you're saying. Their memories are of the great leaders, the great traits they've
Yeah,
learned, the statistics, the plays, all that tends to fade over time. They might not even remember the scores of games. Some of those details get lost, but they remember the leadership, the traits, the characteristics, the personalities, some of the human stories that I think are important that you're talking about. That's what sticks with the men that play this game over time, not so much the statistics and the plays.
Yeah, because you can have a player who really beat uh, his his uh, his life. I will say another word, but I have to stay polite. But every day when he coming to practice, he was the first one, the last one to leave. He do extra works. He really do everything. But at the end, sometimes you you maybe not a starter, or you're a starter, but you have some bad performance. But it doesn't mean that you don't train the right way, and he's not a good person on the field and off the field. So sometimes it's about having an overall on everything, and this is why I really want to do. And so it's been 25 years you're a journalist, so it's almost yesterday. so
Sometimes it feels that way, sometimes it doesn't.
so you start in 2000, by the way.
Yes,
So it
that's
was the St. Louis Rams, yes, when they start
yep,
winning the Super Bowl, right, with Dick Vermeil, right? The
correct.
game against the Titans. Because something it's very important is the history. It's always important to remember
Yes,
the history in the right way, because sometimes it helps you to understand what is happening now and to
very much.
evaluate how is happening now. Because every time something happens now, we think that it's extraordinary, but when you put it on perspective through the history, not that much at the end. Or in the other way, you think it's not extraordinary, but if you put that in the historical perspective, it's extraordinary. So it works in the both way. So what was your biggest memories through those 25 years that you can share? And one question specific: what was your first day? Do you remember your really first day to the I don't know if you go to the Saints facility or where it was, but what was your first day as a journalist?
I remember it clearly, Dan. I covered the sugar. I mentioned the Sugar Bowl. I covered that football game as it was a national championship game between Florida State University and Virginia Tech. Michael Vick was the quarterback for Virginia Tech. Peter Warwick ended up being a great player in the NFL for Florida State. I covered that game for the Times-Picayune in the newspaper, and was supposed to have the next day off, and was going to start covering the New Orleans Saints as a new assignment. So I'd covered LSU football before that. I covered the college here, and so I was supposed to have the next day off, and instead, the New Orleans Saints fired Mike Ditka, who was the head coach.
Yeah.
Everybody knew he was going to be fired, but they didn't expect it to happen the day after the Sugar Bowl. It was supposed to happen later in the week, but instead, they fired him the next morning, and I had to drive in. I was still living in Baton Rouge, where LSU University is. I had to drive in that morning and start my new assignment covering the New Orleans Saints the day they fired Mike Ditka. I had to write
Wow.
the lead story in the newspaper the next day, and I didn't get in till 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning because the Sugar Bowl's a night game, and I had to write on deadline and then drive another 45 minutes to home. So I was not a happy camper that that next day. I was just miserable because I'd gotten in late, had to get up early, and really didn't, to be honest with you, didn't know exactly what I was doing. It was my first day on the job, and it was a huge story. So I remember that clearly. And I would say my best memory, without question, a lot of people would think it's the Super Bowl, but it's not. It was actually the Superdome reopening game after Hurricane Katrina, Monday Night Football. The Saints beat the Atlanta Falcons, and someone that I've become close to over the years, a player for the Saints, Steve Gleason, blocked a punt early in the game. A minute and a half into the game, the Saints scored a touchdown. And that night, it was the first game back in the Superdome after the hurricane, major construction. If you remember, the dome roof got ripped off by the storm. A lot of people didn't know if New Orleans was going to recover from that disaster. A lot of people didn't know if the New Orleans Saints would ever make it back as a franchise in New Orleans. So there was a lot of symbolism, a lot of emotion in that game beyond just a football game, beyond just sport. It
Yeah.
meant a lot more symbolically to the city of New Orleans to have a game back there on national TV. And for my friend Steve Gleason to make the biggest play of the game, there's now a statue outside of the Superdome erected in honor and commemorating that play. That'll always be my favorite memory.
Yeah, and it shows to the world how if I can say that with a lot of respect, how resilient was New Orleans
Yes.
through that because we heard a lot about that. And I watched that game too, by the way, too.
Very
so,
cool.
so yeah, it was like the first game in New York after 9/11 was
Yes.
those games that I really I remember because I was young when 9/11 happened, but I was feeling that that moment was crucial for everybody because the symbolism, sorry, can you help me with the word?
Yeah.
Because
Symbolism.
symbolism, yes, of that, for New Orleans too, it was really important. And sometimes that you understand that you can understand it, and this is what we're talking about. Sports, it's something, but it's something around society. So you can see it as sports as everything, but you can see sports in society as everything too, because a lot of things are connected. The only difference is in our world, when our works. Sorry, if you're a lawyer, if you're chief, or in a restaurant, you don't have the performance level, public performance level that you can have in sports. That everyone can talk. That's the only difference. But
Yep.
in terms of working and doing your best to reach the next level, to doing better each and every day, to improve, to go through your limits. Sometimes you're sick, but you're going to work. It's the same thing that when player playing injured and going on the field on Sunday. This is the same thing. And sometimes it's good to remember that even if they are millionaires and they are professional athletes, they're still working. It's work. So you can ask as a fan that a player give you everything because you're a fan since 20 years, for example, because you're it's his work. So when training is finished, or the game is finished, he going back to his life, to his family life. It's the same thing. You don't want to see your boss coming when you're arriving at dinner the night, and your boss coming and asking you stuff. No, I'm at home now. It's my private time.
Yes. Well, I
And
would say this. I would say this, Dan. Like what you're talking about is what you get out of sport, and the qualities, the traits, the principles, some of the life lessons you learn from that sport apply to everyday life. And the best example I can give of that is Steve Gleason, who, after he retired from the National Football League, unfortunately developed a disease, a terminal disease, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is the medical term for it. It's the same disease, similar disease that Stephen Hawking, the great physicist, had. Um, and Steve is still living with us today. He just passed his 14 years with the disease. Normally, people die 2 or 3 years after being diagnosed with ALS. Steve is still going strong, largely because of the lessons he learned from football. You talked about resilience, work ethic, some of the drive and commitment that he learned from playing American football. He applied that to his journey with this terrible disease, and it's allowed him to have a family. He's had 2 children since being diagnosed, and he and his family still live a very inspiring life here in New Orleans, and he's become a icon and a hero across the world for the way he's lived his life, and he learned those principles through football.
I think you said everything with that, and that's the purpose on sport. That it elevates you into a level that you maybe never expect. You can do
Yes,
it in the same life. The only difference is, instead of having a ball, you can have a pencil. But at the end, it's the same. It's the same mentality that you can develop. But you are a journalist, but you're also a Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors in a modern era group, if I'm doing well, because I studying. Because for me, when I start looking at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, it was something very complicated to understand because it's not just you elected a player; it's an entire process, and you don't want to elect uh, every players. You want
right.
to do it in a specific way to keep the excellence of the game because those names will be remembered forever. So it has to be specific, a specific thing. First of all, my first question is how do you become an Hall of Fame? How can selectors, how it works? If you can share it, of course. If you could not, we don't share it.
No, no, I can share. So it's interesting. The selection committee that I'm a part of, there's one representative of each National Football League city.
Yes.
That because they want someone that was there that covered the players that might one day be elected to the Hall of Fame. So they want every National Football League team to have a representative. And my predecessor before me at the newspaper, Peter Finney, who was kind of my mentor as a journalist, he was the selector for New Orleans and a representative for decades before me. And then when he retired, he asked if I would like to follow in his footsteps. And of course, I was honored. It's a tremendous responsibility. You mentioned earlier how important it is. You feel like you have the obligation to the players to represent them because you can change their lives uh, if they are in the Hall of Fame. I mean, that's a life changing moment for them. So I take it very seriously, my role, not just in New Orleans Saints players that I might be representing, but also all the players that have a chance to get in the Hall of Fame. There's only 48 of us on the committee, and so it's a very distinguished honor to be on that committee. And we just had our recent vote recently. I can't share with the results, but I can tell you that that meeting that we have, it starts at 8 a.m. and it doesn't end till usually 5 p.m. I mean, it is a
Wow.
all day meeting, and it's very intense. And there's a lot of back and forth debate that goes on because of the importance of making sure the five people that we put in each year are representative of the other Hall of Famers that are already in Canton, Ohio.
Yeah, so don't worry, I will not asking you everything about the result because it's coming live, so we just have to wait. And this is sometimes you need to respect the passions because it's a virtue, so it's good. But I've been studying. I've been working with some of historians. Some are on the senior group, for example, or contributors like Ken Crippen, you maybe know, or Jack Silverstone in Chicago. So I need to ask, I need to or John Turney. I need to ask to understand because it's easy to remember that a player is great, but it's better to understand the entire whole process and as you watch the thing. For example, in my mind, in the 90s, we were throwing the ball more, much more than we running the ball. We were running the ball more than we throwing. And
Correct.
to be honest, when I go through the numbers, it was more balanced game in the middle of the 19. It's become more balanced football game. So you have to. In 70s it was that, but it's growing. It's changing. And some of the things uh, there is some positions that are complicated to evaluate because I don't know why, but for example, if you took the offensive line position, it's I don't know if it's the worst, to most difficult to evaluate. And my question is, it's because of for example, in defense for a defensive end, you have the sacks, the tackles, so you can have metrics, but in offensive line, I have been struggling finding metrics because you don't have for an offensive line how many pressure you avoid, of many pancakes or hold you open for the run. It's maybe because those stats are secret, and this is why there is experts and people from the couch like me. But I try to understand uh, in regarding this position, why is maybe more complicated to evaluate metrics and maybe more complicated to see which player could be an Hall of Famer based on that. I'm just asking if I'm doing the wrong direction. I prefer you telling me because I want to improve.
No, no, I think it's a very good question, and you're exactly right. It's very limited statistically, the analytics and metrics for offensive linemen. And really, it's way better now than it was 5 or even 10 years ago. There was very little, if anything, regarding offensive line metrics just a decade ago. You can find it if you're willing to pay for some of the advanced sites on the internet, Pro Football Focus, Sports Information Solutions. I know both those have great offensive line metrics and analysis. ESPN has their advanced site, also has offensive line statistics. So you can cobble together some of it. But what I tend to rely on for offensive line, and it just so happens, Dan, that I'm representing this year Jari Evans, who was up for the Hall of Fame this year, who was an offensive guard for the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah.
So part of my presentation always has to have a little bit of metrics to support his candidacy for the Hall of Fame, but also just rely heavily on teammates, former coaches, opponents, and their testimony toward his greatness and toward his deservingness for the Hall of Fame honor. So I tend to rely on statistics, team metrics, right? The New Orleans Saints in those days were one of the top offenses in the league. So obviously his blocking at the line helped that area, and then testimony from players. But you make a good point, and I think it's growing, that area, to help. I think it's also an area that needs more growth because, as you said, there's a lot more statistics for almost every position except for the offensive line.
And to be fair, because I watched the semifinalist list, and then I watch Yanda
Yep.
with Newski, Willie Anderson, Evans, Jari Evans. You have Richmond Webb, who was the first one of the semifinalists, and it's kind of complicated to evaluate. When I was watching, I see who was the best in that list, who has the best credential, and it's and I look at the cornerback position also. If you look at today, with all the rules change we have through the history, it's kind of complicated also to evaluate because, for example, of offensive line, and I'm just sharing with you. I'm not saying any times I'm speaking, please, and I ask to anybody who will watch that. I'm not saying I have the truth or I understand everything. I'm trying to understand it. It's, for example, the pressure avoid pressure for an offensive line. It's much more better than how many sacks you allowed during your career, because most of the time a sack, it's a one play. It could be a
Yep.
one of the crucial, but how many snaps you have to protect your quarterback or open holes for running? And this is some stuff I'm not sure how. I don't know how we can evaluate those metrics, but it's really could help. And with social media, you know why when in YouTube you can find more games that we think during the 80s, 70s, and 90s that we can watch entire games. So you have to take your time to watch everything, but we really can go back through the history and understand better. Because I'm just sharing that with you. For the player who are in their final years, for example, last 5 years, it's maybe something that we can all think about the offensive line, because you have so many after that we fall in the senior. And I
Yes.
understand that when you are in the senior, it took me so much more time to be elected, more than those 20 years that we've been waiting for. So I know that in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, we are not talking about fairness. It's not the point. It's not about it's fair, but maybe it's like, you had the first ballot with something very important. We can maybe have something through the final years of the eligibility, looking at those positions that we know it's kind of more complicated to have the metrics, to give a chance to someone who is really deserving. I will say that, to have a chance to be, I not say it's debate, but we think about it. I don't know if you what you think about that. I'm just sharing. I hope I'm not doing
No,
something
you're
bad.
you're you're making a great point, and I would say you touched on something I'd like to expand upon, and that is the challenge we have as selectors, because we're taking these players, and usually at the finalist stage, there's 15 players that we are evaluating and listening to the cases for their candidacy, the Hall of Fame. And often those 15 players represent different, not only different clubs, but different positions. Like you said, some are offensive linemen, some are quarterbacks, some are receivers, running backs, every position just about has a representative in each class. And not only that, Dan, but they might have played in different eras. Some might be 5 years ago they retired. That's the required interim that they have to have before they're eligible for the Hall of Fame. 5 years, but there's some players we're evaluating that might have played in the 80s, and so it's you're comparing players from different eras with different rules. You mentioned it's much easier to pass now than it was 15 years ago when the rules for defensive coverage were much more stringent. I mean, we're not as stringent. You could get away with interfering or holding. Much more contact was allowed, so you can pass much easier today. And we struggle with that sometimes comparing wide receivers now compared to 25 or 30 years ago when
Yeah.
their numbers and their statistics weren't nearly as impressive as they are now. And the comparison I always make to our job every year is by the time these 15 players make it to what we call the room to be debated over their Hall of Fame candidacy, they're all great. I mean, they're the 15 best
Yeah.
that have made it through the process. So it's not a matter of are they great or not. I mean, of course they're great. They wouldn't have made it that far without being great. So I compare it to like a beauty pageant. You know, they're all gorgeous. It's just everybody's subjective. How do you look at beauty? How do you look at greatness? And there's lots of different ways to judge that through statistics, through testimonies, like I said, through all pro. How many times were you named to the all pro team? How many times did you get elected to the Pro Bowl? Were you the all decade team? There's all these different honors that also feed into your evaluation. So there's so many categories that you judge these players on, and sometimes they're coming from different eras at different positions. How do you compare a guard to a quarterback and his worthiness of being in the Hall of Fame? And I think one thing we do try to do, though, that you made a good point on is if you think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and often when we have 15 players, sometimes you might think all of them deserve to be in there, but we can only put 5 in at a time. Often the time period that they've been waiting goes into your evaluation. In other
Yeah.
words, if that happened with me a few years ago with Sam Mills, he was in his final year of eligibility, 20th year, he'd been waiting. Well, if you think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame as a selector, then you should probably go ahead and vote him in because other players are going to have opportunities in future years to get voted in, but it's not going to be the case for Sam Mills. That's going on this year with a couple of players that are near the end. Eric Allen is near the end of his tenure of being an eligible candidate. So you do factor that in because there's a 20-year window that a
Yeah.
player has to be eligible to get in. So that's one of the things that Jari Evans, I think this is his second or third year of eligibility. So he's still got 17 years left to try and get in the Hall of
Yeah,
Fame.
but if you can make it, you make it. I mean,
I
sometimes
agree.
they, I mean, you know what I'm saying that because when and I share it in the most humble way again, but when I watched the Hall of Fame last year, and I see Steve McMichael receive his due as a senior,
Yes.
the first thing I said first it was it's great, but in the second I say it would have been better if he was on his feet and enjoying the moment by his.
Yes.
But when you took it to the excellent, it can be perfect because there is so many. I mean, I can name how many players that are on the list for the modern and the senior, but I mean. We can do it in 2 3 years. It's took
I know.
time, so it's not a criticism. I say I'm just what I'm looking for. It's always about next. I'm not looking to the future. I'm always looking for what we can improve, what we can make as in a better way. So I'm not sure that maybe there is a better way to do it for the future. But my only job, I will say, as a fan, as a human being, is to try to put the awareness in the thing that I think we can make a little improvement. When we say that, it's maybe when someone as you say, enter his in his final years and eligibility, we're just saying, okay, he is really deserve it or more. Are we making it? Because we know if he enter to the senior group, we will talk about him in 50 years maybe.
Right.
So he will be not be there anymore. So what we want to do, but that's my final word. And do you have a name or a few names for next year that they are in their final 5 year that we all need to look at it and maybe think about it to understand better to maybe I don't know support the case in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I mean, Eric Allen is in his 19th
You-
year.
so
So if
it's
he
really
doesn't get in
someone.
next year, he'll go into the seniors. There's certain players, Jared Allen, that have been on the ballot for 8, 9 years that have been waiting. And that's a grueling wait. Every year you get your expectations up. Are you going to get in? Then you get let down. So I think those players stick out to me as having been there. Torrey Holt, the receiver from the great Rams teams. I think those guys are probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. It's just a matter of when. And then next year, for me personally, next year will be the first year that Drew Brees is eligible, and I expect he will go in first ballot. I certainly believe he should be first ballot, but he will be on the ballot next year for the first time.
And to explain to anybody, the first ballot give you an extra award. I will say you receive the golden jacket. You are an Hall of Famer, but you are first ballot. It gives you
Right.
extra for those who are really, I mean, up in the mountain. I will say that. So
Best of the best.
so they're the best. Like Tom Brady, we all expect Tom Brady will be a first ballot. I think.
Yes.
I guess Peyton Manning was
Peyton
a
Manning
first
was.
ballot.
Yes.
So Drew Brees has to be a first ballot. And I, I have a last part that we can talk about. It's American football in France because we are in France. So we have to talk about the American football because it's growing. To be honest, the league that we played in France is the European Football League. So it's team from everywhere in Europe. And we have just one professional team is the Paris Musketeer who just signed Jack Del Rio as a head coach.
Exciting.
And it's exciting, but the league still needs to grow. It's not in the level of the CFL or, of course, the NFL or college football. It has to grow, but all start with bringing, I guess, like the Paris Musketeer did, bringing coaches to 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 train as a higher level those players because we have great players in Europe, not in the American football, but you can say in soccer we have so many great players in basketball too. So we are able to create great athletes. But if to American football is not just that; it's to understand the game, understand the competition. How do you perform into that each and every game, each and every snap, each and every years? So I think it's a good step forward to growing and make these sports who deserve so much more credit in the world and help the business of the NFL because at the end it's a business.
Yes, yes. Well, I can say this, Dan. Jack Del Rio has a connection to New Orleans. I mean, he
Yeah,
played for the New Orleans Saints.
and
He,
coach.
yeah, coached for the New Orleans Saints, and he ended up marrying a Louisiana girl. I mean, I think his daughters lived here for a while. I don't know if she still lives here, but he's very much connected to New Orleans. So if you get a chance to talk to Jack when you're over there, you should definitely bring up his connection to Louisiana
I
and the
will.
New Orleans Saints. That's exciting. And look, I've been to France multiple times. As I mentioned, it's my favorite country in Europe. I love Europe, but France is close to my heart being in New Orleans, the most French city in America. And we're very proud of that, by the way. And the Saints have a connection through the NFL's new international marketing rights program. They picked the country of France to be their marketing partner. So I know the owner of the New Orleans Saints, Gail Benson, has been to Monaco. She's been to Paris, spreading, all the information about American football over there. And I know it's still growing, as you mentioned, but I think it's getting ready to explode and become much more popular. And as I said to you before we went on air, I expect the New Orleans Saints will be playing a regular season NFL game in Paris in the next couple of years. I don't know exactly when it's going to be, but they're going to play a game over there in Paris, which will be very, very exciting.
It will be very exciting. So at least we have to wait until that to meet in person because I'm pretty sure
Yes.
you will be there to watch that game.
I
In
will.
Paris.
That's going to be at the top of my list. I would love it to be in Monaco too, though. I wouldn't mind
Monaco,
that.
Monaco is very special. Monaco is very special. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's
no,
it's a
but
it's a
it's going to be in Paris. I mean, they want to play in Paris, the heart of the country. But I've got to tell you, just real quick before we go off, my favorite sporting event other than American football is the Tour de France. I watch it every
ah
year. Every morning I get up. It comes on early, of course, over here, and I am addicted to cycling. So I'm as much into the Tour de France and what that means to that country as say the Super Bowl is to American football, and maybe in your interest there. I just got to tell
yeah.
you, I love it. And it's the same thing. It's the same things we're talking about. I watch it to see, the traits that those great cyclists have and those teams and how they come together to compete for the title. To me, it's the same qualities and characteristics they're going through. The same things apply to sport over here in American football. It's no different.
So it's I can't wait for that. And you're right because during the Tour de France you can watch the beauty of the country too because there is
Yes.
so great.
Oh,
Uh,
it's amazing.
when
It's
when
like
we
a
are in the
like a
mountain.
postcard.
Yeah, it's a postcard. Like every day, you have a postcard to take it. Hey, Jeff, the great thing with that, we can make another show anytime you want, and we talk more about anything today. What's to have an overall? I will be loved because. Sadly, it can't come up now because it's too late now. But I want to present you the founder of the Paris Musketeer and talk a little more about American football in France and how it's growing. I think it would be a great share episode that we can do another time. So I'm looking forward for that, Jeff. And also, if you want to invite some New Orleans Saints journalists or players or contributors or coaches that have played and you want to bring them in this show, I will be very happy to share the journey in the way I like to share. It's beyond state. Embrace the journey, understand how it takes to be a professional athlete, to respect a little more what they are given each and every Sunday to the sports. I let you the final word for the French community. Please talk to the French community.
Oh, well, look, I love your country, first of all. The lifestyle in France to me is the best in the world. I go to Nice almost every year. I have friends in Nice, so I spend time there and I always try to get up to Paris. I'm a total Francophile, and I would return the favor, Dan, if you ever come to New Orleans. To come to an American football game, see the New Orleans Saints play, I will tour you around here because I think so many things happen here in New Orleans. When I go to France now and I see the influence that France has had on New Orleans, I'll say like, oh, that's why we have that kind of architecture here. That's why we have that name here because it's all based from France. There's so much of an influence there.
I
So
would
I'm
love to.
and I'm very excited about your program and your podcast. I think it's a great idea, and I'm happy to come back on. Let's get more into the details about the growing popularity of the sport. And I'd love to talk to the American football, the owner, the director over there in France as well. I would love to be a part of that, and I can definitely help you talk to somebody with the New Orleans Saints that's heavily involved with the connection between the country and the football team here too. Happy to help.
All right, thank you very much. Hey, have a great time. Put positive comments to Jeff Duncan, who have been 25 years talking about football, New Orleans Saints, Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, and more upon of that, a great human being who take his time to share with us any knowledge he has. Thank you very much, Jeff. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.